Colossal Question.
What if the sun exploded? The big, hot, glowing ball of light we call the sun is really a medium-sized star out in space. When a star explodes, we call it a supernova. A supernova is very rare, very bright, and very powerful. If our sun suddenly exploded into a supernova, well, the whole solar system would be destroyed in the blast. The colossal boom would vaporize whichever side of our planet happens to be facing the sun, and the other side wouldn't make it out much better. The temperatures would be about 15 times hotter than the surface of the sun. In other words, if the sun went supernova, the entire planet would be destroyed, and quick. That's the bad news. But there is good news too. Our sun is way too small to ever explode. Only really big stars go supernova, and our sun is considered medium-sized, so that's nice. Sadly, there's more bad news. Our sun may never be a supernova, but that doesn't mean it won't have a destructive death. So, how will our sun die? Well, instead of simply exploding, our sun will actually start to get much bigger, turn red, and become slightly colder but still scorching as it dies off. Astronomers call this kind of star a red giant, and they mean it when they say giant. The sun will get so big that it'll completely eat up Mercury, Venus, and, Earth too. Mars will survive, but become a burning hot desert. Once the sun becomes a big, bulbous, full-sized red giant, it'll start to blow its outer layers off into the solar system. Think of a star kind of like a balloon. A supernova is a bit like popping a balloon, quick and extreme. But our sun's death will be a lot more like air being slowly let out of a balloon. As more and more of the outer layers of the sun are released into space, the star will get smaller and smaller until there's just a white-hot core remaining called a white dwarf. Once our sun hits this stage, it'll only be slightly bigger than the Earth, but about 200,000 times more dense. Mercury, Venus, and Earth will all have been destroyed long ago when the sun was a red giant. But Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune will keep spinning around the sun. Since white dwarfs are so tiny compared to your average star, they don't give off very much light and continue to slowly get dimmer and colder over billions of years, eventually becoming so dark they give off almost no light at all. So, could our sun ever explode into a supernova? Nope. But its eventual death will still be bad news for everything and everyone on Earth. Lucky for us, that won't happen anytime soon. The death of our sun is expected to happen several trillion years in the future. So, scary? Sort of. But unless you plan on sticking around for the next several trillion years, you don't have to spend too much time worrying about the heat death of the universe. There's plenty of time for you to prepare. What is the sun made of? Life on Earth simply wouldn't be possible without our sun shining in the sky. It provides the light and warmth needed to survive and thrive. We've never come anywhere close to sending some kind of a spacecraft to explore the sun because it's so extremely hot that any ship would vaporize from the heat before it got anywhere near the sun's surface. But even from afar, experts have been able to do tons of research on the sun, its surface, and what exactly it's made of. For starters, the sun doesn't have a hard surface to land on, but it's also not just a giant ocean of liquid hot lava. Instead, the sun is mostly made up of two basic gases, hydrogen and helium. The flaming ball of orange energy we see in the sky is really just the result of the hydrogen and helium gas mixing in the sun's core. This causes a never-ending nuclear reaction that's kind of like millions of atomic bombs going off all the time. Those nuclear reactions all release enormous amounts of energy into space. Scientists call that energy electromagnetic radiation, and it reaches Earth's atmosphere in the form of light and heat. And it might be hard to believe, but experts consider our sun to be medium-sized and on the cooler side compared to the biggest, hottest stars in the galaxy. The hottest stars don't burn a golden yellow like the sun. Instead, they glow a bright blue. And stars that are even cooler than the sun are more of a reddish color. But in this case, cooler stars still burn at about 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So, still pretty scorching. So, now that you know our sun is just a giant burning ball of explosive energy, maybe you'll remember to wear sunscreen on those hot summer days. Could humans live on Mars? Space agencies around the globe are hard at work trying to figure out how to put humans on Mars. Maybe within our lifetime. How do they plan to do it? The journey to Mars will be long, so the spaceships can't just be bigger, they need to also be much more energy efficient. You see, once the ship leaves Earth's atmosphere, it'll need some sort of propulsion system to blast it all the way to Mars. And Mars is about 200 times farther than the moon. That's not exactly a quick trip. Even with state-of-the-art tech, experts believe the journey could take anywhere between 7 to 9 months. That's what makes fuel efficiency so important when it comes to sending a spaceship to Mars. So, for such a long trip, what kind of energy-efficient fuel might we use? Well, most likely a super hot electrically charged gas called plasma. When harnessed by a special kind of engine, plasma acts kind of like the biggest shock of static electricity you can imagine. Strong enough to blast a massive spaceship into outer space. The special kind of engine is called an ion thruster. They've been used by space agencies for decades to explore deep space, but never on anything close to the scale you'd need to send a large manned ship all the way to Mars. More efficient fuel means you need less of it to make the trip. Less fuel means the astronauts have more room on board for food, water, air, research equipment, and anything else we might need while on Mars. When the spaceship finally arrives, it probably won't land. It's way too big to land safely on the surface. Instead, it'll circle around Mars, acting as a space station. Crews would likely descend in small capsules designed to land on the dusty surface. Once safely on the surface, astronauts would set up and live inside a special pressurized and temperature-controlled tent-like structure called a habitat. Why? Well, Mars's atmosphere is a lot thinner than Earth's. That means there's way less oxygen to breathe. It also means it's a lot colder. Mars is negative 81 degrees Fahrenheit on average. Not the kind of conditions humans could survive without technology. Humans would need to put together solar panels, harvest water from deep underground, and build big greenhouses full of plants that can survive all the harsh planetary conditions. Some plants would be grown for food, and others would be grown to make oxygen for the astronauts to breathe. Right now, this all might be hypothetical, but expert engineers around the Earth are getting closer and closer to bringing these colossal plans into reality, reworking and perfecting their designs for the ideal mission to Mars. So, yes, humans could one day live on Mars, but who knows when? It could be 300 years from now. It could be 30. If everything works out, it might even be you. What are UFOs? UFO stands for Unidentified Flying Object. What's that exactly? Well, technically speaking, it refers to any unknown object in the sky that can't be officially ID'd. There's been thousands of reported UFO sightings in the skies across the globe. A vast majority of these sightings have been since the 1940s, and mostly in the US, but not all of them. More than one Roman historian wrote about seeing strange things in the sky. Residents of a medieval city apparently saw hundreds of spheres, cylinders, and other odd-shaped objects flying in all directions overhead. But it wasn't until the 1940s that the number of reported sightings skyrocketed. Most think the phenomenon started with fighter pilots. You see, while flying long missions at night, pilots would sometimes report seeing unexplained lights or other odd occurrences in the sky. This was right around the time the government started using the term UFO to describe these sorts of sightings. The first report that really caught public attention was made by American pilot Kenneth Arnold in June of 1947. He reported seeing 9 flying saucers or flying discs flying fast and in formation. Around the same time, the US military recovered debris from a crash in Roswell, New Mexico. This became known as the Roswell UFO incident, one of the most famous UFO sightings in history. Both of these sightings started to drum up a ton of public interest in UFOs. Before long, there were a slew of new sightings being reported all over the country. Stories of aliens and flying saucers had gripped the nation. Legitimate or not, people seemed to be seeing UFOs everywhere. Okay, so UFOs are definitely real, as in there are some objects in the sky that just can't be ID'd. What actually are they? Well, in the case of Kenneth Arnold, there's no concrete explanation for what he witnessed, but many at the time believed he saw a state-of-the-art jet overhead from a nearby airbase. And as for Roswell, it was a top-secret military balloon that crashed in the desert. Officials rushed to the scene and shrouded the whole thing in secrecy, not because of aliens, but because their UFO was classified government property. As for the rest, most UFO sightings are later found to be normal objects, like aircraft, weather balloons, or even kites. Others were caused by natural phenomena like oddly shaped clouds, meteors, or electromagnetic activity. Some sightings can be chalked up to good old-fashioned pranks. Given the amount of interest in UFOs and how much media coverage they can get, pranksters the world over have seized on the chance to cause a little chaos. And of course, there are a very few percentage of UFO sightings that remain unexplained mysteries to this day. In fact, in the age of high-def cameras, images and footage of UFOs have even been officially released by the US government. Most of these show small pyramid or sphere-shaped UFOs soaring through the sky and moving around in ways that seem otherworldly. What are they? Well, they remain unidentified flying objects until we can figure out what they are. Okay, so are UFOs real? Yup. It's just that they almost always turn out to be something perfectly explainable in the end. But for that tiny sliver of sightings that simply can't be explained, well, I guess we'll all just keep wondering. Why isn't Pluto a planet anymore? Did you know that thousands of years ago, people didn't have every form of entertainment imaginable in front of their eyes at all times? Yup, they had to sit down, relax, and just look up. Sounds boring, right? Maybe at first, but once the sun went down, people started to notice that there were lots of interesting things up in the night sky. Not just pretty little stars, but patterns, colors, and objects of different sizes that seemed to move differently than the rest of the stars blinking in the sky. People started noticing these strange little balls of colorful light, balls that would ultimately be known as the planets in our solar system. But finding each of the planets in our solar system took some time and some stargazing. Funny enough, Earth wasn't actually the first planet we discovered. We lived here all along, so first we had to look up and discover other planets in the sky before we realized we were on one of them. Ancient Babylonian astronomers ID'd Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn sometime between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. That's a really long time ago. The idea of the Earth being one of the planets in the solar system dates back to at least ancient Greece around 2,300 years ago. The ancient Greeks called them planetes, which is where we get the word in English. It means wanderers, since the planets forged their own paths through the sky. Over the next 2,000 or so years, humans mostly found the occasional meteor, asteroid, or moon floating around in the solar system. It wasn't until 1781 that the next planet was discovered, Uranus. An astronomer named Sir William Herschel first mistook the seventh planet from the Sun for a comet. Fast forward 65 more years to 1846, and Neptune is officially discovered by Johann Galle, the eighth planet from the Sun. Fun fact, it was actually first spotted by Galileo all the way back in 1612, but he mistook it for a star. Whoops! And finally, of course, there was Pluto. The poor dwarf planet that used to be a planet was discovered in 1930. This gave us a solar system of 9 planets: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and last but not least, Pluto. It was the coldest, furthest, and smallest planet of the group, even smaller than the Earth's moon. Pluto was a fixture in our solar system for more than 70 years, just minding its own business out in the furthest reaches of our solar system, doing its thing. So, what changed? Well, Pluto itself didn't actually change at all. What did change was the actual definition of a planet back in the early 2000s. You see, up to that point, the scientific definition of a planet was surprisingly loose. There was no real criteria to decide what officially made something a planet. Up to that point, astronomers had loosely grouped all the planets together, since they all seemed to move on their own paths through the sky, unlike stars. For a long time, this super loose definition wasn't much of a problem, but that started to change as more and more Pluto-sized planetoids were being discovered. In the past, it would take hundreds, sometimes thousands of years for humans to notice a new planet. But with modern technology, we started finding lots of new things quickly. So quickly that we were forced to ask, should all these new discoveries be considered planets too? After all, they weren't much different from Pluto. And if Pluto was a planet, then without an official definition, they probably should be planets too. So in 2006, some of the top planetary scientists got together to try and define a planet once and for all. They came back with just 3 basic things an object needed in order to be considered a planet. First, it needed to orbit the sun. For Pluto, that's a check. Second, a planet must be large enough so that its own gravity molded it into a spherical shape. Another check for little round Pluto. But the third condition for planethood is where Pluto ran into a problem. A planet must clear the neighborhood of its orbit. In other words, as a planet travels, its gravity should clear the space around it of other objects. Some objects might crash into the surface, others might start orbiting the planet and become moons. Unfortunately for Pluto, it simply isn't even close to big enough to clear everything in its path. So, astronomers decided to officially reclassify the former 9th planet Pluto as a dwarf planet, leaving us with only 8 planets in our solar system. As of 2023, there are just 4 other dwarf planets in addition to Pluto: Ceres, Eris, Haumea, and Makemake. So, why isn't Pluto a planet anymore? At the end of the day, the little planet that could in the far reaches of the solar system simply isn't big enough to be an actual planet, at least not based on the current definition. It might sound cold, but honestly, it's nothing new for that frozen ball of ice. So don't shed too many tears for poor Pluto. I mean, it's floating so far out there, chances are it hasn't even gotten the memo yet. What do astronauts eat in space? Eating up in space is tricky business. Why? Well, there's no gravity in space. If you drop something up there, it'll just slowly float away. It doesn't matter what it is. Food, dessert, or even a drink will drift around the ship. As you might imagine, that's a bit of a problem for astronauts. Luckily, scientists figured that part out before firing people off into outer space. When Yuri Gagarin became the first person in space back in 1961, he also became the first astronaut to eat a meal aboard a spaceship. He had 2 servings of pureed meat and 1 of chocolate sauce, which he squeezed out of tubes like toothpaste. Not exactly a 4-star meal, but it got the job done without making a big mess. Over time, scientists have continued to think up new ways to feed people up in space, so they don't have to only eat mush out of tubes. Their solution? Freeze drying. To freeze dry meals for space travel, the food has to be cooked, then quickly frozen and dehydrated. Because it's completely dried out, it doesn't need to be refrigerated, lasts way longer, and isn't as messy since it's frozen solid. At first, that didn't taste much better than the meat tubes. But over time, experts figured out how to have hot water on the ship, so astronauts don't always have to eat it dry. They use a machine to add water to soften it up, making it much tastier to eat. Speaking of water, drinks are different up in space too. All liquids, like juices, coffee, and tea, are kept as a powder inside special pouches, with a straw that lets you add water and drink it up without making a mess. Over the decades, space food has continued to advance. Fruits, nuts, chicken, beef, seafood, even treats like candy. They even get condiments nowadays, like ketchup, mustard, and mayo. They get salt and pepper too, but it's in liquid form. Why? Well, sprinkling salt or pepper in zero gravity would cause the tiny grains to float away. And if they did float all around the ship, they could easily clog up air vents, gunk up equipment, or even get stuck in an astronaut's eyes or nose. So, safe to say that over the years, space food has changed a lot and gotten much, much better. And those upgrades are likely to keep coming. So, how do astronauts eat in space? With a lot of help. And even still, they might need to chase down a candy or two as they float away.